Hello and welcome to FO Talks. I'm delighted to be turning the tables on Atul Singh today by interviewing him on the subject of India's recent protest movement known as the Cockroach Movement. My name is Sam Tully. I grew up in India. I've covered the Indian markets for 30 years. I speak a little bit of Hindi and I've tracked the Indian economy. But I certainly couldn't claim to know it as well as Atul, who is being a police officer in India, a very senior police officer. He comes from a storied political family, and he's steeped in Indian politics and really understands, as a colloquial Hindi speaker, I would say, the issues that are facing everybody in India today. So thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be doing this, having this discussion today. Atul, I just
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam.
I wanted to ask you, India's been in the news a lot recently. It's been in the news particularly because of this movement that has swollen on social media initially, and then physically demonstrations in Delhi, which resulted in harsh police action, and the resignation of a very senior minister, unprecedented, I should say, resignation of a senior minister in Modi's government. I'm very keen to explore this and see how much of it what the background is to it and what we might read into it, and more importantly, how it feeds into the context of where India is at today.
Sam, thank you. Context is everything. As some of us who travel the world and believe in nuance understand. And I say that partly in jest, but there's more than an element of truth. And why? Some have compared this to the Arab uprising. Some have compared these protests to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal that led to the fall of governments. Some have compared this to the 1970s movement. The Council on Foreign Relations did that in the US. And yet, all of them, whilst having elements of truth, are mistaken. Let's begin with why the comparison with 1970s does not stand. Well, at that time, the Bihar movement had the message of total revolution. Socialism is what Jayaprakash Narayan wanted. He had been involved in the land reform movement. Yes, they were protesting corruption. Yes, they were protesting unemployment, especially educated unemployment. Yes, they were protesting the increasing authoritarianism of Indira Gandhi, was running an emergency. And there are battles. As many of our friends, mutual friends say, Narendra Modi is running a soft emergency. Emergency was hard porn. Narendra Modi is soft porn. So that may be true, but that's the end of the comparison. Because remember, this movement is, for good and bad, it is not as ideological. In a way, it's almost, how do you pronounce it? Nihilistic, is that? Or how would you pronounce it as a Brit, this word?
I would say nihilistic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that my pronunciation is...
Your pronunciation is the benchmark. So nihilistic, it's a nihilistic movement in many ways. So let's lay the context, why this happens. Entrance exams are big business in India for the coaching companies, private coaching companies. In fact, the amount the private coaching companies spend is greater than India's education budget. So the entire entrance exams racket, as I call it, shows A, the complete collapse of India's education system, and B, the limits of its economy. And I'll explain further very quickly. Why the collapse of the education system? Because if you go to a coaching school, and those of our viewers in the US, in the UK, and especially in Germany and Japan, will feel discombobulated now. You go to a private coaching school, it's not after hours. You go there, you start working from 8, probably till midnight. If you're really crazy, till 2 a.m. You do not attend school. There's a school that puts fake attendance for you, dummy attendance as it's called, because the board of education, or the law requires you to have a certain percentage of education in a formal school, but you're not going there. Instead, you're going to a private coaching, you slave away for a few places. And why are you fighting for these few places? Because good institutions are very few, despite over 75 years of India's independence. And the only way to get a decent job is to get into these good institutions. They will lift you in the modern caste system in post-independence India. So entrance exams make and break lives, and every year kids commit suicide if they don't get in. I ran away from home at 17 because I cleared 0 entrance exams, and I did very poorly in my school leaving exams. So I know I'm speaking from authority. I'm not talking as one of those high-flying kids who was a star at 17. So this is a very traumatic process, and the reason is there are no jobs for, and I come in from the educational failure, wherein the official system no longer works, never worked, and now it's completely collapsed. Two, why these exams are a big deal? Because India has had jobless growth, and India has the world's largest youth population with over 360 million people between the ages of 15 and 29. I'll repeat, 360 million people. That's more than the population of the US where I sit. That's certainly more than the population of UK where you sit. Now,
absolutely. I mean, all of those.
Just two more quick facts, yes. And then I'll hand it over to you. Of these 360 million people, let's say in 1983, 4% of the 20 to 29-year-olds were graduates, and 13% of them were unemployed. And in the 70s, the figure was pretty much the same. In 2023, 23% were graduates, and around 67% were unemployed. So graduate unemployment is hovering around the 35 to 40%. I repeat, 35 to 40% level in the last 25 years. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, those are very powerful facts. And I think it leads on to this whole question that one of India's economic strengths has been perceived to be its demography, and those statistics you just mentioned underpin that. But 2/3 of the population is currently under 35. That demographic dividend will close by 2040. But the reality is that demographic dividend, if there are no jobs, or rather if there are very few jobs, and if aspirations are lifted, but yet they cannot be fulfilled, could turn into something different. And the concern is this, the beginning of that? So that's why I wanted to ask you, will this movement prove sustainable? Is it a new phase of political engagement, or are there echoes from the past? I think you touched on that. But I wonder if you could add some current elements into it, like, for example, the way that this movement has so successfully engaged social media with a government that has itself powerfully used social media in the past.
Great question. So let me parse this out and address each of the points. Are there echoes of the past? Absolutely. Yes, there are echoes of 1970s, but there are echoes of the youth movement in 1989, the anti-reservation movement. Not 1989, 1989, after 1989. I think the movement erupted in 1991.
Is that the Mandal Commission? Or is
Mandal Commission, indeed. V.P. Singh, who came from the same clan, same Rajput clan as me, was losing power and cynically brought in a reservation policy that didn't save his position on the throne, but unleashed a set of politics that has defined India since. And the policy became, let's reserve places at the top for the other backward classes. There were already reservations for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and the idea was that if more of these people came to the top, the leadership of India would be different, and therefore the direction of India would be different. The reality is no. Everyone is trying to clamber like a crab out of the bucket.
Yeah.
And bottom remain does not invest in primary education. Gets a leg up. It does not invest in select. As I said, the coaching industry, gets more money now than the entire education budget of India, which shows you that the school system has collapsed. The recent statistics I'm looking for, how many schools have closed in India, and forgive me if I don't have the figure off the top of my head. These are statistics that have coming out. Apparently, thousands of government schools are shutting down, and so there's been a privatization of education right at the bottom, and even maids who work in apartments will tell you that government schools are terrible, even though the salaries of government teachers are much higher. But often they take the salary and don't teach. And they tell you that I'm trying to send my child to an English medium school, or even better, a convent school, a Christian missionary school. So Christians run good schools in India, and of course, private sector runs good schools, but the government schools are a disaster. And part of it, the reason you have this disaster is because the education system is completely collapsed. It does not give people skills. Now let's come to the movement itself. Will this persist? Perhaps it's led by bright people who began their career in the Aam Aadmi Party, which has now lost steam, which is now a one-man band led by Arvind Kejriwal, and he himself has been accused of corruption, has lost credibility. And a lot of these people are younger, hungrier. And talking of youth protests, remember that the Anna Hazare protest, talking of echoes of the past, occurred in 2014. It was against corruption. And there is an argument to be made, and a strong argument to be made, that both Arvind Kejriwal and Narendra Modi, both of whom are Baniyas. In fact, Modi himself is an OBC. So both of them were products of this 2014 anti-corruption movement, because people wanted a change. And both of them were savvy at social media. People forget Arvind now, but the Aam Aadmi Party was supposed to be this grassroots party, and all of the leaders of the Cockroach Janta Party come from the Aam Aadmi Party. But there's a far more cynicism. So will this movement sustain? Perhaps. I'm not enthused by the fact that they came up with an agenda for change using Claude. And I'm not greatly impressed by the fact that they began as an Instagram post and they use CJP. It is certainly tapping into a fervor of discontent. So yes, it may, as long as discontent remains, my prediction is the CJP will remain. And the day discontent dissipates, or God forbid they come in power, they will be hoisted by their own petard, just as Narendra Modi has been hoisted by his own petard. He's fundamentally, he claims he has a 56-inch chest. He's got a 56-inch paunch. He's a man who's a social media creation. There is all style and no substance. And he has not addressed any of the challenges of the system. And my challenge is the CJP wanted the resignation of the education minister, but they have not yet demanded that the National Testing Authority itself is a society under an 1868 British Colonial Act. It should be an institution answerable to Parliament, given the importance of elite institutions in India. So to stop here, India is broken, and this movement does not have any ideas to really substantively fix the problems, the deeper underlying problems.
Actually, that's an interesting point, and I think the question, one of the questions I was going to ask you actually neatly feeds into that in a way, is what is the appetite and ability of the government to implement the necessary reforms and enforce much more rigorously against this perceived endemic corruption and maladministration, which both the students, but it seems to me the students are echoing the voice of, a broader popular discontent, and not speaking, personally about the Prime Minister per se, but about, the BJP, which, as you say, came into power at the time of that 2014 movement against corruption. And the last thing I would mention, just which I thought, given what you're talking about the Aam Aadmi Party as well, I seem to recall that their electoral symbol, which is very important in India, is the jaru, which is the broom, because they were there to sweep clean this whole issue. And guess what? They also got labelled as corrupt. So where does this all end? When is a government really going to be able to get to grips with this, or is it something that we just have to learn to live with?
Let's again parse it. I think the Cockroach Janta Party, a lot of people have blamed the foreign hand. People have blamed George Soros. In fact, my very dear friend Shiju Verghese, who lives in London, actually in Hampstead, leafy, bourgeois, green, idyllic Hampstead, and doesn't speak any Hindi, commented, George Soros is backing them. This whole thing is backed by foreign powers, maybe the CIA, maybe Glenn Carl, my co-author, sitting in the basement, is engineering all of these people like puppets, and they are all dancing to his tune or flailing their hands because of his pulling of the strings. Some of that may be going on, obviously, but the reality is they are evoking massive discontent with the Modi government. So yes, forget about the movement. This is the beginning of the end of Narendra Modi. This is the beginning of the end of the Hindu political project. This is the beginning of the end of the Bharatiya Janata Party. And the reason is, for the first time, the Hindu middle class, the urban Hindu middle class, the young urban Hindu middle class has revolted. And this was the bedrock of support for the BJP. They have lost their core voter. And the 360 million young people, a lot of them are never going to vote for this party again. And this is something that the perceptive members of the BJP already realize. So what is happening? What is the deeper issue? The deeper issue, if we really go into it, there are three elements of government. We know that from our politics classes, indeed our civics classes. You have the parliament that makes the laws, you have the executive that imposes the laws, and you have the judiciary. Why did this movement begin? Because the Chief Justice of India, Suryakant Sharma, who grew up in a small town, who went to second-rate universities all his life, who is known to be provincial, whose integrity is in doubt, whose professionalism is in question, dismissively called the protesters cockroaches. So the trigger for this movement is not Narendra Modi, it is the collapse of the judiciary with millions of pending cases. If you go to court, it is like waiting for Godot. You may die, and your case might never, ever come to conclusion. And this is an open secret. That's why people go to mafiosi. That is why often you settle things through extrajudicial and extra-constitutional means. That's why I know why my former colleagues like encounters, which are all generally fake. You go and bump off a criminal, the matter doesn't come up for court, justice is rough and ready and done. If you go to court, the case may be in hearing forever, the prosecution would be shoddy, and you'd be posted away, and the criminal would intimidate witnesses. So, number one, the judiciary has completely collapsed. Number two, the parliament has abdicated all responsibility. The National Testing Authority, and this is where the Cockroach Janta Party should demand that there should be a legislative, a parliamentary basis for the National Testing Authority, which is so powerful, which is run by an IAS officer. And then I'll get to the executive, now that I've mentioned the IAS. But the parliament has abdicated its role of questioning. Modi has a huge majority, and the BJP members of parliament are yes men. There's no inner party democracy. There are no primaries. And you have a decline in the quality of parliamentarians. They are largely not very conscientious, even when they are educated. And so you have collapse in parliament. And the third thing is the executive. The executive, Modi runs basically an all-powerful prime minister's office staffed by Indian Administrative Service officers, the IAS. The IAS is very much like the power-drunk, heaven-born Mandarin elite of imperial China presiding over the rotting carcass of the Indian state. The Reserve Bank of India is run by an IAS officer who has never, ever studied economics. The Archaeological Survey of India, which under British times, when your forefathers were running the country, was headed by an archaeologist and a military man. The Surveyor General of India, which under British during British times was headed by a military man, because you need to draw borders, particularly in tricky Himalayas, was a military man, is now an IAS officer. So you have complete lack of domain expertise, and it is IAS officers who are sycophants to the political elite, whether it is Modi or whether it is Arvind Kejriwal or it is Mamata Banerjee. So the legislature doesn't matter. There's no discussion. The judiciary has collapsed, and the entire government is run. We have elected monarchies wherein an elected chief minister or prime minister runs with his lackey IAS officers who are generally corrupt, incompetent, and arrogant. And they summon World Bank officials to state capitals and won't even show up to meetings. So this collapse of faith in the institutions of the republic itself have led to this nihilistic revolt called the Cockroach Janta Party. They use the very term the Chief Justice of India, that eminent mediocrity Suryakant used, and turned it on its head. Over to you.
Atul, you paint quite a dramatic and powerful picture, but I'm sure it is an issue that many would take a picture that many would take issue with in terms of the progress that India has made, particularly economically and in terms of infrastructure and in terms of business success over the past few years, and the growth of the middle classes, which has happened.
Sam, life expectancy has increased. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Indians are healthier than before. Yes. But let me give you some figures, all right? What percentage of Indian children are stunted? Indian children under 5? What percentage?
I don't know that number offhand, but...
So, Sam, it is 35%. The figure for Pakistan, we can be happy, is 34 to 38%. But the figure for Somalia is 25%. The figure for neighboring Bangladesh is 24 to 28%. The figure for Kenya, the black people, which Indians despise, because, of course, Indians are known to be tremendously racist.
I think you're on extremely controversial territory. But I get the point.
But the figure for Kenya is 18%. And let's talk about the United States. It's 3.4%. The UK, 1%. Germany, 1.7%. And in Sweden, it's so negligible that, they say it's a baseline statistical minimum. So it doesn't even show up. So yes, you're right about all the progress in India. But at the same time, whilst per capita GDP is is now, let's say, $2,700 per annum, and yes, there are lots of companies that are good. Bharat Forge, in manufacturing, you have persistent systems, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the institutions of the republic have imploded, and they've imploded particularly. They began with Indira Gandhi, of course.
Yeah.
Imploded with Narendra Modi. But yes, you have to bribe the judge as well. Free market now. Justice is for sale.
Yeah. What I would like to sort of drive towards, and given that we have to conclude fairly shortly, is where do you see room for optimism in all this, Atul? What's the way forward so that these protesters, what they're protesting about, and indeed the broader malaise that you refer to, that is there with a system rather than purely any particular individuals, what is going to be the way, or do you see any way out of that? Because obviously political distrust and levels of trust in politics around the world, including in the West, is at a very low ebb at the moment.
Indeed. And I think human beings go through these cycles. And this is nothing new. So the very fact that the youth have protested is a sign of optimism.
Yes.
Perhaps this will lead to greater reflection. Perhaps some of them will listen to me and say, hang on a minute, we need legal reforms. Perhaps we need controls on the coaching industry. Perhaps we need the National Testing Authority to be headed by an educationist, not an IS officer. Perhaps we need a parliamentary act. Perhaps the opposition will say, bring a parliamentary act, don't register it as a society which is not transparent, which is opaque, not accountable, not audited, and run by a lackey, and constantly leaks. And this is what we didn't talk about. The reason the protests happened is they were leak after leak after leak, which literally means that the exam papers were out on the market for people willing to pay the price. Imagine if that were to happen in the UK. In the UK, you have Ofqual, which was established by an act of parliament, which is headed by an educationist. And it's a completely different kettle of fish. So I think if the optimism I see a little bit, the way out will be harnessing the energy of these youth protests into deep thinking about fundamental problems and institutional reform, because we can't tinker at the edges. This entire committee, which is again full of IS officers, and fast-track courts, which Narendra Modi has established, is an eyewash. It won't lead to anything.
Right.
Anything
Right.
constructive.
I mean,
the resignation of the education minister is also an eyewash. I mean, there was this grand villain, I call him, Vineet Joshi, in my book, who was the first head of NTA. He was education secretary. He was also chief secretary Manipur. When everything he touched turned from gold to lead. He had the opposite of the Midas touch. And there's been no disciplinary action at all against him. He's still in power. He's still in his fancy house and servants and bodyguards. So the point is, there's got to be accountability, and it can't be low-lying officials. If you are the CEO of NTA and you were the first CEO of NTA, your head should roll. So I don't mean the literal guillotine, but I mean some form of guillotining of IS officers en masse for incompetence. So Humphrey Appleby would be appalled.
Yes, exactly. That's another phrase I would certainly take issue with. But having said that,
I don't mean their heads should be chopped off and we should play football with them. I mean they should be tried, they should be convicted, and they should pay the penalty for their criminal negligence, if not corruption.
Yeah. So what I thank you very much for those forthright views. And I think as we draw this to a close, I think one thing I would sort of draw a different type of parallel with is the sort of 91, 92 economic reforms that were basically forced on India by a situation where they couldn't, even in spite of huge political opposition, it was something that they had to do. And maybe it'll be very similar, but in a different respect, that some of these structural reforms will come through when they are absolutely necessary. And India,
Indeed.
because of its transparency and because of its democracy, and let's face it, at least all of this, in spite of the way that media has somehow changed the coverage of in India, all of this has played out in the public gaze, unlike in many other countries that we can mention. And that in itself is also something that is more positive. But thank you very much indeed. And there's a lot more to discuss, and this is certainly something that I'm sure FO Talks will return to again.
We'll be back to discuss more and discuss things in detail. And yes, you're right. The 1991 reforms were pushed through by the International Monetary Fund here in Washington, D.C., after India had to take its gold to London, to the Bank of England. And I think India probably always reforms only in a crisis, as do most countries, to be fair. And I think a crisis is coming, a massive economic crisis is coming. We have been predicting it in FOI, where you're a partner, I'm a partner, our geopolitical risk advisory. You can see the yen has crashed. The South Korean stock index crashed. Taiwan is under pressure. And I think the crisis is coming to India, and perhaps that is the great opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.